Hello and welcome to Polar Night. This is a brand new visual novel, and I already played what's available, and it kind of gives me The Thing vibes. And if you haven't ever watched The Thing or its prequel, then you should go watch it, so you know what I mean. But the gist is that a, I guess, Arctic exploration vessel along with its crew disappear under unknown circumstances. And then when people go to look for it, it's just missing. There's not a trace of it. And then the family of these people receive a letter from some guy claiming that he might have some information in order to help them search for their family members. And for the most part, most of them are like, well, okay, yeah, let's go try to find what remains of them and their vessel. Well, this guy, I'm assuming he's a possum, because look at the tail. He is very dead set on them being alive. However, as far as I can tell, he is not the main character. The main character is a different person altogether. And he is of the mindset that what he's going to find is, the remains. While this guy is on the mindset that what they're going to find is living people. They're going to be all nice and safe and sound. That's why he kind of annoys me. But anyways, like I said, the reason it gives me the Thing vibes is because, Arctic setting, it's basically an Arctic night or polar night. So you're just going to get darkness like throughout the whole time span. And, obviously, as you can see through here, there seems to be murder afoot. There's a blood trail on this boat, and there are mysterious circumstances by which the crew and the boat itself disappears. And what else? There was something else without revealing any spoilers. Oh, well, the prologue, the beginning part, which I will be reading right now, it sets up something going on. It's basically a mystery. So yeah. So anyways, buckle up, because hopefully this gets a little gory, a little horror-y, because I like horror. But yeah. Well anyways, let's begin. The wolf couldn't see anything through the blizzard. Beyond the windshield was just a flurry of white. But then he didn't have a destination in mind anyway, just away from there. He had one hand pressed tightly to his abdomen, trying to compress the wound there. The other gripped the steering wheel of the snow truck tightly. A mix of adrenaline and the extreme cold disguised the pain. He was surprised he'd even managed to get the snow truck running and driving away from that madness. His eyes glanced at the glove compartment. Maybe he could just throw it out into the snow and drive away from this. Seriously? After all that, you're going to fuck everyone over to save your own skin? The wolf ignored him. His companion, sitting in the passenger seat, engaging was pointless. His ears pinned back and fangs bared, partly from anger, but mostly from the pain in his belly. And yet shame bubbled within him. How could he think of breaking his promise? I'm not surprised, to be fair. It's all you ever do. Again, the wolf didn't respond. A flash of agony shot through him, reminding him of his grave wound. He grimaced and cried out, but his cry was followed by an awful sputtering sound. The sputtering continued until the engine fell silent, the vibration of the truck ceasing. The wolf sat there, staring at the dashboard in a mix of bewilderment and accusation, as if he could shame the machine into starting up again. He glanced at the fuel gauge. Empty. How? How could he have overlooked it? His departure had been hurried, to say the least. They'd not had the luxury of properly preparing. After an awkward pause, the wolf threw a frustrated tantrum, cursing and slamming his fist against the wheel, kicking the footwell and screaming. This isn't helping, The wolf only barely resisted a furious snarl at the other figure, reining in his anger in order to slump forward, head against the wheel and eyes closed. Tears rolled down his muzzle. The journey had lasted maybe 10 minutes at most. He couldn't have traveled more than a couple kilometers. All of that effort and sacrifice just to fail within walking distance. There's a first aid kit in the back. You look like you need it. The voice snapped him back out of his misery. His eyes flicked open, now aware of just how tired he was. How the steering wheel of this utilitarian truck might as well have been the fluffiest pillow ever. As his awareness flowed back, the stench of the iron in the cabin made him gag. He knew the source. He brought his trembling paw up to his face. Though the redness was hard to make out against the black fabric of his glove, the soaked glistening told him it was saturated with his blood. Everything felt distant, like he was drunk. And God, did he know what drunkenness felt like? He reached into the glove box, his trembling hand brushing that cursed thing to grasp the flare that he'd been given. Regardless of anything else, he needed to warn them, to tell them that he'd failed. Maybe they'd come for him. The wolf reached his trembling, blood-soaked paw to the door and after a brief pause, opened it. He stumbled out of the cabin, not bothering to close it after him. Something told him there was no point. Bracing himself against the side, he staggered through the knee-high snow, still keeping pressure on his wound, though now it was more of a token act. He couldn't see more than a foot or so in any direction. Instead, he placed a paw against the truck's side, using it to guide him back to the back. Upon reaching the rear doors, he had to pause for a moment. The howl of the blizzard saturated his mind, drowning out his thoughts. He brought the flare up, preparing to activate it. And then, just like that, his weak, trembling hands let it slip from his grasp. The buffeting wind and snow instantly carried it out of his field of vision. Fuck! Oh! He dropped to his knees, glancing around frantically as he dug at the snow for the flare. Without it, the others would have no way of knowing he needed to be guided back. He pawed desperately at the thick snow, feeling his ability to move wane as the cold cut through his jacket and trousers and sucked the warmth from his already weakened body. Gazing at the snow illuminated by the rear headlights of the truck, he slowed and stopped, breathing heavily as his blood-soaked hands carved red swatches in the snow. He stared at the crimson streaks, realizing he was never going to find the flare. No! He threw back his head and let loose a primal pharaoh lupin howl of rage and despair into the unceasing blizzard. He stared into the inky blackness only slightly penetrated by the taillights. They didn't stretch more than a few meters into the blizzard. He could probably try to return the way he came, but he couldn't have made the journey back, even if he wanted to. He turned, half crawling back towards the rear doors of the truck and the only shelter around. The cold barely registered anymore. He felt like his legs were moving on automatic. He pawed clumsily for the door handles. He missed them several times, his vision feeling oddly blurred. Was it the cold? The snow buffeting his face? Finally, his hands reached the handles and gripped them, yanking them open. The cargo compartment was almost entirely empty. He'd not had time to stock it. He turned to gaze back where he'd come from. He scanned for the glowing crimson of the return flare, but there was nothing. They'd agreed to wait for 2 hours before popping flares to guide him back. Far too long, far too late. With Herculean effort, he hauled himself up out of the snow, dragging his body into the cargo compartment. He turned, reaching for the doors once again, and pulled them shut. Just like that, the blizzard dropped from an ear-shattering howl to a dull roar. As the wolf regained his bearings, the pain in his belly made him cry out, bringing tears to his eyes. He scanned the interior, looking for the first aid kit and saw it on the side wall. His stomach lurched as he felt the wetness of his own blood soaking his entire abdomen. He reached a trembling hand for it, his fingers brushing the surface of the plastic container. But then his legs faltered and he stumbled, his hands grasping for purchase. The kit tore off the wall as he toppled forward onto the crates on the floor. The impact knocked any remaining breath out of him and left him paralyzed. His pain cried out as a strangled gargle, the kit crashing to the floor, spilling its contents everywhere. He lay on his belly, one hand stretched out desperately for the roll of bandages, but he no longer had the strength to move. No, God, please. I don't want to die. Mom. Images of Mom came flooding into his mind, filling him with a yearning and an ache more intense than any wound. He'd had given anything just to see her, to hug her, to tell her. Connor, I need to hear you say the words. The figure spoke behind him. He couldn't see him, but he could hear the bitterness, the mocking tone. I need to hear you say it, Connor. What you should have said to me and Mom before you abandoned us. Connor finally sagged. His limbs were numb and his vision was fading. Connor, say it. His vision went dark, closing in. What little strength he had left abandoned him, and he receded, his consciousness a flickering light in the encroaching dark. I'm so sorry. Garret. Thursday. Clutching the 3 packs of cigarettes, I amble over to the counter, while the bored-looking bull cashier watches me. I slap the 3 packets of cigarettes onto the counter. Det alt du vil? I gave him a blank look. I didn't speak Norwegian. He rolled his eyes, likely dealing with non-speakers on a frequent basis. Will that be all? He enunciated clearly like I was deaf, stifling the urge to tell him to stick his attitude. I gave him a nod. He told me the cost. My ears twitched. Much cheaper than Britain. Maybe another couple packs. I was tempted to grab an armful, given how cheap tobacco was here, and also maybe to fuck with him a bit, but I decided against it. I didn't want to take the piss. Or to have him kick me out smokeless. I pulled a wad of Norwegian kroner out of my pocket and rifled through them before separating out a few crisp notes and placing them before the cashier. Cheers, pal. I gave him a brief smile and nod, but he didn't return it, simply handed me my change. I slipped them into my pocket before turning awkwardly, my large packet making it hard to maneuver through the slightly cramped store. I turned carefully to avoid sweeping the tightly packed shelves of the contents with my backpack and marched to the door. I pulled my open pack of smokes from my pocket, fumbling for my lighter in the other pocket. My prized possession. Even before I started smoking, this is the only thing I had of my granddad, an Ellison Sports Elite. He used it in the Second World War, told me never once failed to light. Using my lips, I pull a smoke from the pack, stuffing it back into my pocket as I bring up my lighter, shielding it using my other hand from the frigid wind. Immediately it caught. The tip of my smoke started to glow and I inhaled. The welcome, calming rush of nicotine flooded into me. After a full breath, I flicked the lighter closed, tilted my head back, and after a moment, exhaled. The smoke mixed with the sub-zero wind and turned into a billowing cloud, hot breath and fumes mixing with frigid air. At this time of the year, Longyearbyen could be pretty much summarized as dark and cold. As my boots clutched the snow, I realized that, for all we Scots liked and whinged about our weather, this place was truly something else. And yet, I had to admit, sullen cashier notwithstanding, I liked it. I liked the cold, the snow, the quiet. Only a couple thousand people lived here, and yet, it didn't come across as a ghost town. Just peaceful. Not like Glasgow. I was fond of my hometown, but it could also be a madhouse at all times of the day. It was the only place that I knew that had a McDonald's that needed bouncers because of the nutters who came out at night. I shoved my hands in my pockets and kept the smoke set between my lips, drawing on it occasionally. The meeting spot was just up the road, maybe a 10-minute walk, for all the thick, warm gear. I was still feeling the chill. Longyearbyen, the largest settlement on Svalbard, a Norwegian archipelago near the Arctic, the northernmost settlement on Earth. On the other side of the road, walking further into town, were a pair of men who had rifles slung up about their shoulders. A pretty crazy feature in Svalbard is that residents are required to have firearms if they leave the settlement into the wilderness for protection from polar bears. Although they can't carry loaded firearms within the settlement itself, it was still odd to me to see guns being carried in the open. They glanced around at me and I averted my gaze. I heard mumbling followed by a harsh laugh. I probably looked like a tourist or something. I tugged my black fringe down a little. Fortunately, my left eye was on the opposite side to them. By the time I arrived outside the cafe, my smoke was almost finished. I glanced inside the window trying to see if anyone is there. It was deserted apart from a solitary figure, a possum guy sitting at a table with a cup in front of him. He seemed to be absorbed in a book. No idea if he was a local or not, but given this is where we were supposed to meet, I figured it was a good bet that he was here for the same reason I was. I guess it was good it was just the one guy. If I'd stumbled upon a whole group, I might have lost my nerve at so many new faces. With a final draw of my smoke, I stubbed it out onto a bin, then pushed the door open. The coziness of the place hit me immediately, like I had slipped into a warm bath. Despite the late hour, the place still looked open. Chairs were neatly set against clean tables. A single staff member was behind the counter, bustling away. Apart from the generic background music these places tended to play, it was totally quiet. The possum didn't react to my entrance, even though the guy behind the counter gave me a smile and a nod. He must have been really into that book. I made my way towards his table. When I arrived, my shadow passed over him. Hey. He jumped, glancing up at me. He really must have been engrossed, but when his eyes met mine, instead of smiling, he looked like I just pulled a gun on him. Hi? I swallowed hard. I was used to the odd looks and awkward first impressions on account of my eye. I wasn't used to people looking like I was brandishing a butcher knife. Are you here for Sylvia? He gave me a wide-eyed stare of fright for a moment before relaxing. Oh yeah, sorry, you just, surprised me is all. He gestured to a seat opposite of him at the table and I gratefully slipped my pack off, set it on the floor by the chair and sat down. Where'd you travel from? He closed his book and slipped it below the table into a pack sitting by him. Scotland, still not shaking off the journey. 20 goddamn hours. Huh, Vancouver, 30 hours. He gave me a cheeky grin. I'm Stefan Golubev. Pleased to meet you. He extended a hand and I shook it with a warm smile. Garret Reid, likewise. Want a coffee? It's really good here. Easily one of the best I've had. Sure. He turned around and waved at the barista. Same again, please. The barista gave a thumbs up and started preparing a coffee. He turned back to me with an excited grin. It's honestly amazing. None of that Robusto crap. Aye? I gave him what I hoped was an interested look. I knew fuck all about coffee. I'm more of a tea person to be honest, but I figured it'd be easier just to go with it. Yeah, which is a pity. Longyearbyen is pretty dull and cold. I thought my tail was going to freeze off. I don't know, I like the cold. Wish I had more time to sightsee. To each their own. He gazed at me with those big, excited eyes. I admit, he did have a somewhat infectious smile, although he didn't speak, instead watching me expectantly. I remembered the book he'd been reading when I entered, the one he'd been so engrossed in. So, what were you reading? Oh, this? He reached beside him and pulled the book out, which, now I could see it properly, was a very battered paperback. It's Distant Origins by Rupert Gadaya. Ever heard of it? I shook my head, glad he was up for filling the silence. It's about how the Mosaic period was a work of extraterrestrials. So you know how during the Mosaic period a bunch of different species all gained sentience around the same time? Well... He didn't even give me time to answer, so my jaw just hung slightly open while I tried to maintain eye contact and nod. I guess he's enthusiastic. Gadaya thinks it could only be because of outside influences. Think about it, how else would so many different species all start to gain sapience around the same time? So he thinks that some starfaring race visited and uplifted a bunch of different... Very enthusiastic. Wait, did he just say starfaring? And Gadaya thinks that these visitors left behind clues that governments have hidden and kept locked away. Oh no. He thinks that some of them are still out there, just waiting to be found. He theorized that deep in the jungle of South America. Christ on a bike. He really wasn't going to stop. Of course he was called a crank, but academics agree with him. They just get suppressed and ridiculed if they try to tell the truth. And he thinks that they even disappear people who speak out about it. Like this one time. I made no effort at all to hide my slack jaw and staring gaze. He didn't care. Or at least didn't notice. My hand moved to my pocket for my cigarettes, looking for an opening to take a smoke break before he started talking about the Rothschilds. I jumped as the door opened, inviting a burst of icy air. I turned to look, seeing a pair of young Capran women shuffling through the door. A third figure, a Lapin guy, followed, making a loud purr as he entered. Thank Christ, some warmth. All three looked familiar in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on, especially the hair guy. I could swear I'd seen him before. The Capran girl with the blue jacket stamped her feet to dislodge the snow in her boots, while the one with the bikini scanned the room before locking eyes with me. I cringed at the unblinking gaze, feeling like she was reading my mind or something. My hand automatically moved to my fringe, pulling my dark hair to ensure it obscured my left eye. Her companion also glanced around before spotting us. She gave a warm grin and happily waved. Just as the three arrived at our table, the barista swooped in to place my coffee before me. I gave him a grateful smile as the three new arrivals pulled up chairs to sit around our table. Hello guys, can I get you anything? Oh, a latte would be nice. Tabby? The goat lass in the blue jacket spoke with an American accent. Again, not sure where precisely, but vaguely enough that I can't place it. The young girl had her shoulders hunched and her hands in her pockets. She gave a non-committal shrug. Make that 2 lattes, please. Thank you. Make mine a cappuccino, would you? The hair had a clear Irish accent as he tugged off his gloves and rubbed his hands, blowing into them for warmth. The barista moved off to make them their drinks. Well, I take it you two are here for the Sylvia? The blue-jacketed girl smiled, leaning forward and hugging herself to warm up. Immediately, the beanie-wearing girl pulls out her phone and focuses on it, ignoring the rest of us. Yeah, we're here for the Sylvia. I'm Garret Reid. I'm Stefan Gulubev. Pleased to meet you. The Lapin guy sat next to me, drawing close and rubbing his arms for warmth. I'm Aaron Marsh. Pleased to meet ya. He gave a grin and a small wave before going back to blowing into his hands. Nice to meet you, fellas. I'm Gail Waters, and the chatty social butterfly is my sister, Tabby. Want to introduce yourself? She nudges her sister as she scowled and muttered, without looking up from her phone. Hi. Me and Stefan exchanged a look, but Gail just laughed. She takes time to warm up to people. No shit, I thought, judging by the way she was thumbing the screen. She was scrolling something continuously, probably some social media shite like Barker. God, I could be such an old fart sometimes. Hope this Sylvia has decent heating. Forgot to bring my ear warmers. Aaron complained, taking his ears in his hands and rubbing them. What did you expect this far north? Don't you have a hood? Gail chuckles and smirks, though she did rub her own ears a little. Yeah. He pouted. Lapins were really finicky about anything touching or covering their ears. I guess it made sense for people with such sensitive hearing. Wolves like me had sensitive hearing, nowhere near as good as Lapins, and even we didn't really like stuff covering our ears when we could help it. That said, leaving ears uncovered out here was a great way to get frostnip. Do you guys know each other? He motioned between Gail and Aaron. Oh no, we just met about an hour ago. Decided to stick together since we're all going together anyway. So, what do you guys do? Gail directed at me and Stefan. I decided to get my introduction in first before Stefan started talking about the Illuminati. Oh, I'm a Sparky. Nothing interesting. When I get a bunch of blank looks and raised eyebrows, I added, Electrician. Oh, right. Is that what you call it from where you're from? Just a nickname we use. I'm so used to calling it that I forgot how it must sound. I gave a small laugh, cringing inwards at the 4 sets of eyes now set on me without realizing I tug at my fringe, ensuring I cover my eye. That sounds cool. Are you like the guy that people call to fix their fuse box? Sometimes, but I mostly work on industrial sites. What happened to your eye? I froze. Tabby had stopped fiddling with her phone for a moment to gaze me directly in the eye, a look of morbid curiosity on her face. Tabby, you don't just demand people explain stuff like that. I felt my stomach clench, instinctively tugging at my fringe. Had she seen through, or correctly assumed my fringe was hiding my left eye? Judging from Arran and Stefan's reaction, they'd clearly been thinking the same thing. They just evidently had more tact. Why not? I'm just curious. As much as Gale tried, I could see that the others were now all staring at me, even with more rampant attention. Gale offered a chargant look. You don't have to explain anything. No, it's fine. It's not like there's much to say. I had an accident. Gale smiled apologetically and gave her sister a "there, satisfied" sort of look, although from Tabby's expression, she was evidently not satisfied. She mercifully did not press the issue and went back to her phone. So, how about you, Gale? What do you do? I seized the opportunity to move the focus away from me. Oh, me? I'm not that interesting, to be honest. Just finished my first years as a registered nurse. Seriously? Bet that's been a stressful time. Oh, it was, but finally getting out of the university and being able to work with patients is just so satisfying. Long hours, but I feel like I'm making a difference, you know? What about you, Stefan? Me? He looked more than a little uncomfortable. I, work retail. Nothing wrong with that. Where do you work? I took a sip of my coffee. While the warmth and scent was inviting, I could never really get on with the taste. I only typically drank it if I needed to wake up. I was glad the conversation had turned away from me. I tuned out the conversation a little, glancing from one person to the other. They seemed nice enough. Even Tabby had stopped fiddling with her phone to observe, though she didn't say anything. With another sip, I tuned back into the conversation. What about you, Arran? The hare was about to speak when the barista arrived with a tray carrying their drinks. Oh, thank you kindly. He beamed at the barista, flashing his pearly white teeth. No sooner had his cup been placed before him that he took it up and sipped, eyes closed with a satisfied mmm. That hit the spot. Oh, I'm a student, studying psychology. He looked a little bashful as he added, and I deliver pizzas in the evening to make some scratch. Neat! Do you get to eat lots of pizza then? The words deliver pizzas made Stefan's eyes light up. Well, sometimes. We get pizzas that are cancelled or the wrong order, but as much as I like pizza, even I have my limits. Besides, I need to watch my figure. He gave me a sharp elbow to the ribs and a wink. I nearly choked on my coffee. What about you, Tabby? You in college? Stefan asked between gulps of his coffee. Yep. She said in a sullen voice, not even looking up. After a few seconds of not elaborating, Stefan, Arran, and myself all exchanged glances while Gale simply gave an embarrassed smile. You could at least try to be friendly. We're going to be traveling together for a while. Tabby, meanwhile, was utterly unmoved by the conversation, slumped down in her chair with her coffee untouched. I'm not here to make friends. I don't even want to be here. You're the one obsessed with finding Mom. And just like that, it was as if the freezing air from the outside blew over us. Even Stefan's bouncy energy vanished. Even I thought she was being a brat. She did remind us why we were going on this expedition. It wasn't a pleasure cruise. We were going to find the Arran. And her crew. Or what was left of them. The sound of the door opening again shook us all out of our private musings. Loud clopping heavy hooves on wood echoed through the room as the figure swept through the door. Holy moly! Stefan muttered under his breath, eyes wide with alarm. God. Damn! Arran agreed, though his expression was decidedly more pleased. The equine who entered was huge, easily pushing 6.5 feet tall. His snappy-looking gear did little to conceal a powerful build. He held himself ramrod straight, moving with casual grace towards us with each hoofstep vibrating through my legs. "Good evening. Are you the group waiting to board the Sylvia?" His voice was rich and deep as he gazed at us with eyes that felt like they could see right through us. His accent was odd. It was received pronunciation, very cut glass, yet there was an aspect to it that I couldn't place. He sounded posh, that much I could tell. "Oh, hello. You must be Sharif?" "Indeed, Sharif Abdi. Pleased to meet you all. I shall be in charge of the expedition." "Would you care for, Arran stammered, like he had been approached by his school crush. "A coffee?" "I am afraid not. I have come to collect you all. The Sylvia is ready to board, and we must not delay." Those piercing eyes settled on the hair. His bashful look quickly changed to an unsettled one under his intense gaze. Without a word, Tabby pushed back from the table with a loud wooden squeak of the chair legs on the wood and started moving towards the door. Gale blinked, mouth open as though to call after her, but seemingly decided against it, simply watching her retreating back. "Didn't even finish her coffee." I summoned the barista over to settle the bill. He quickly approached, hands clasped before him with a wide, friendly smile. "Everything okay? Enjoying your coffees?" Yeah, thanks." Stefan recovered from being stunned by Sharif's entrance, and we all started to dig into our pockets for cash. "Here you go." With a casual ease, Sharif slid a few notes from his coat pocket and handed them to the barista. "Keep the change." We all gave him a mix of grateful and surprised looks, but he did not meet our eyes, simply turned and strode towards the door, where Tabby was waiting, still glued to her phone. Thanks?" Sharif did not react, opening the door back out into the perishing cold. Tabby followed after, not even glancing back. "He's, pretty intense. He's pretty stuck up. He's pretty presumptuous. He's pretty..." As we gathered up our stuff, I felt a twinge in my left eye. I froze for a moment. "Please, not now." The twinge could either turn into an annoying ache, with a feeling of sand under my eyelid. That was the more likely outcome. The other was much less pleasant. Gah! My left eye clamped shut in response to the pain. "Oh, what's wrong?" Gale sounded concerned, but I glanced around desperately for the restroom. Spotting the signs for the toilets, I gave them a "be right back" and quick walked towards them. I could sense their confusion and alarm, but I didn't care right now. Tears were already starting to strain from my eyes with the pain. Once I was in the bathroom, I fished in my jacket pocket for the bottles I kept on me at all times. Diclofenac and proximetacaine eye drops. In this instance, the diclofenac wouldn't be strong or fast-acting enough. My practiced hand identified the correct bottle from the touch alone and pulled out the proximetacaine. Like I'd done a million times before, I unscrewed the top and sat it on the rim of the sink, quickly washing my hands. The pain was unimaginable, like an eye full of sand mixed with a red-hot knife through my eyeball. My hands were trembling now, my face aching from the instinctive scrunching of my face to shut my eye and my muzzle wet from the tears. My eyes were in full-blown damage control, flooding themselves to flush out the irritants it believed was there. Taking the bottle, I tilted my head back, used my other hand to force my left eye open with great difficulty, and quickly squeezed. One drop, instantly a cooling, soothing wave of relief banished the worst of the agony. A second drop, and the sandy feeling dissipated. Straight away, my face relaxed as my muscles no longer instinctively tried to keep my eyelids shut. As I hunched over the sink, my breath escaped in a long, heavy sigh. Keeping my eye closed, I allowed the medicine to do its work. I screwed the lid back on the bottle and slipped it back in my pocket. Leaning over the sink, a mix of tears and drops leaked from my closed eye, running down my nose. Fuck, my face really hurt. That was a really bad one. Normally, these attacks tend to come on more gradually, giving me time to get the Diclo drops in before it became excruciating. But ever so often, I get ones like these. I call them thunderclaps, like the headache, the ones my brother used to have. My GP had made it clear to me that proxy was for emergencies only, that overuse could further damage my eye. But with these thunderclaps, I could be useless for half an hour in unrelenting agony while waiting for the Diclo to kick in. Besides, I was completely blind in my left eye. How much more damage could I do? With the pain gone, for now, I straightened up, gazing at my reflection. I regarded my ruined left eye. The milky white cataract was a constant reminder to others of my disfigurement, as if the scar wasn't enough. Garret? You okay in there? There was a gentle tap on the door. He sounded pretty concerned, remembering the way I dashed off. I must have looked a proper sight. Yeah, sorry. I quickly wiped my face and fixed my facial fluff. The door creaked open, and I saw his worried eyes peeking around the side. You sure? What happened? Seeing I was okay, mostly, he opened the door and stepped inside. Stefan followed closely behind, also looking worried. My eye. I gave a hollow laugh in an attempt to lighten the situation. I get these painful attacks. That was a pretty bad one, even by my standards. I'm okay now, though. I patted my pocket. I have lots of eye drops to keep me going. Arran and Stefan exchanged looks before smiling and nodding. As long as you're sure, dude. Stefan brightened, though he had a sympathetic look. I cringed as both of them were now staring directly at my damaged eye. I tried to laugh it off, turning my head to conceal it in as casual a way as I could, tugging my fringe to cover it once again. Seriously, I'm okay. I didn't mean to scare you guys. The pair gave me a searching look, but they finally seemed to relax. Okay, if you're sure. Arran placed a hand on my shoulder. If you're up for it, we should get going then. He and Stefan both stood aside to let me pass, only to face an anxious-looking Gale. Oh, Garret, are you alright? Really, I'm okay. I insisted, giving her what I hoped was a reassuring smile. I noticed that she was holding my backpack and gloves. Honestly, it happens, just something I live with. I didn't mean to scare you. I assured her, gratefully accepting my belongings from her. She gave me a smile and waited for me to put my gloves back on before handing me my pack. I thought you were going to throw up or something. Once my pack was back on, we made our way to the door. Sharif and Tabby were both waiting and looking pretty pissed. What took so long? Tabby looked like she was about to launch into a diatribe, but Gale cut her off. Enough, Tabby! For the first time, I saw Gale flash a genuine angry look. Tabby opened her mouth to speak, but, surprisingly, Gale's glare was enough to make her shut up. If we are all ready... Sharif didn't even try to hide the irritation in his voice. With a flourish of his arm, we all started tromping through the snow in the direction of the Longyearbyen harbor. For a while we marched in awkward silence, the embers of camaraderie we kindled during our coffee mostly snuffed out. I normally didn't mind walking in silence around others, but given the awkward tension in the air right now, I'd give anything to be somewhere else. I prayed to God the voyage wouldn't be like this. With my nerves very much jangled, my hand automatically reached for my smokes. I yanked a cig from the pack with my teeth and reached in my other pocket for my lighter. As I flicked it and drew, I noticed Stefan was watching me intently. I clicked my lighter shut and patted my pocket, holding my smokes. Want one? Oh, no, thank you. I was just looking at your lighter. I raised one eyebrow. Oh? What about it? Is it a Ellithorn? My smoke drooped in my mouth, very nearly slipping out as I gave him a dumbfounded look. You know your stuff, I admitted, utterly amazed. He gave me a cheeky grin, pleased by my astounded reaction. I collected them when I was younger. Never had one, but I recognized it from old catalogs. His smug grin was replaced by a more longing look. Could I see it? Just for a sec? I noticed that we'd fallen a good few feet behind the others. I guess it was good that Sharif and Tabby didn't bitch at us for holding them back. Besides, I was more at ease talking to one person than 5. I hesitated for a moment with the lighter, then I slowly placed it in his outstretched hand. He gave me a grateful smile, then pulled off both of his gloves and tucked them under his arm so that he could inspect it more closely. He turned it over in his hands, running a single finger down the very faded, embossed design on its face before flicking it open. Oh, may I? He gave me a look that was more of a pleading one than of curiosity. I nodded, kind of taken aback by his fascination. When it sparked into life, first time naturally, he gazed into the flame with a look of awe. He actually stopped in his tracks for a moment, transfixed. I stopped too, watching him with a growing sense of bewilderment. I tentatively reached out and snapped the lid shut, snuffling the flame before pulling it from his hands. He blinked, seemingly snapping out of his trance. Sorry. It's just such a pretty lighter. Well preserved and maintained too. Thanks, it belonged to my grandpa. He got it during the Second World War, never once failed him or refused to light. Damn, it's in great condition all things considered. Bet your grandpa had stories to tell. My tail, very much not by my own will, began to sway as my mood brightened. It was kind of annoying that us Canaans and Lupids had such obvious tells of our moods. Other people found it cute and endearing, even though we often couldn't help it. Well, I don't remember much about his stories. He never really spoke much about the war except for complaining about how his squad kept stealing his smokes. He died when I was pretty young. Actually, this belonged to my brother before I got it. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. Still, it's awesome that you got such a memento. It's a little piece of history, you know? My tail swayed more vigorously and I grinned. Oddball he may be, but I liked him. Either Gale and Arran had slowed to intercept us, or we'd been walking faster than I thought. The pair clustered with us, Gale and Arran a few steps ahead, while Stefan and I walked side by side. I was meaning to ask. Gale gave me a concerned look. Do you get those painful episodes with your eye often? I swallowed and felt a pang in my chest. Again with my eye. I took another draw from my smoke, giving myself a moment to consider. Not that often, no. Usually it isn't that bad, and I use my eye drops anyway, which typically stops it. I took another long draw before adding. Cold weather makes it worse, so I brought a shitload of eye drops with me. Oh, I'm glad. It didn't look like a fun time, she said with a sympathetic understatement. Must have been quite the accident to do that to your face. Perhaps it was the presumptuous way he phrased it, or my growing impatience with the subject. Whatever it was, my limbs tightened and my fur bristled. My slowly swaying tail paused and raised, curling upwards. Before I could stop myself, my lip quivered, exposing a single fang, while my chest vibrated with a soft growl. Aaron's tone was sympathetic, but I didn't care. I was shutting his shit down right now. Both Gale and Stefan shot him exasperated looks. A sharp, acrid scent of burnt lemons hit my nostrils, the scent of fear and alarm. I mean, what I meant was, it must have really hurt. Stefan and Gale gave him withering looks. Smooth save. And I thought Tabby was tactless. The scent invading my nose was quickly joined by 2 other similar but distinct ones. Gale and Stefan were clearly also alarmed by my reaction. The tip of my smoke glowed brightly as I inhaled deeply, closing my eyes and settling myself. The prickle of my neck fur settling and my lips covering my fang once more helped diffuse the fearful reaction from the others. As the anger subsided, guilt and shame took its place. My reaction was instinctual, yes, but over the top, and I really didn't want to add to the awkwardness that had already marred our first impressions. Don't worry about it. I get that a lot. They each gave me a relieved look. Still, I wanted more than anything to change the subject. Gale? Did Tabby mention that you were looking for your mom? I wanted very much to get off the topic. Maybe digging at someone else's wound would suffice. Oh, yes, our mom. Emma Waters? She's the ship's doctor. Main reason I decided to go into nursing, actually. Cool. Did she ever mention Alex at all? Alexander Golubev? His face shone with excitement. Oh yeah, Cook, isn't he? She told me stories about him. Quite a character. That's my bro! Stefan beamed wildly. I learned how to cook from him. Can't wait to introduce you. His goulash is to die for. It took a second for me to catch the last part. Introduce? Oh, wait, you still think that they're alive? Arran spoke my thoughts aloud. Of course! Just wait till you meet Alex. He's just the best storyteller and a cook. Oh man, one time he made the best honey roasted. Arran had a clear look of confusion, and when he met my eyes, we both raised a brow. Gale, on the other hand, listened intently, smiling and nodding along, like he wasn't mad. Both of them knew that the Arran had been missing for 2 years. Right? The IRV Arran, an enormous Arctic research vessel tasked with studying Greenland glaciers. The ship that vanished without a trace 2 years ago. The ship my older brother served aboard. Sharif's letter came out of the blue a few months after the search was called off. I remember my mom screaming, the first display of emotion she'd had in months. I sprinted down the stairs, alarmed to find her clutching the letter with tears in her eyes, yet an excited grin. Initially, I was skeptical. Received so many letters since the disappearance, well-wishers mostly, but a shocking amount of hucksters offering psychic help or private search opportunities. But this one was different. Sharif actually had a loved one on board, and we recognized him from the news reports and interviews. But Sharif had failed to persuade the international search efforts to resume. Instead, he would be privately funding a voyage. He couldn't afford to fund it entirely, so he needed help. And so he made the offer that any family member who wanted to contribute to the funding, the search could participate if they chose. Mum obviously leaped at the chance, despite my misgivings and protests. She took out a substantial loan on top of the cost to get me here, when she'd be repaying for years to come. So, what about you guys? Who are you bringing home? His voice shook me out of my thoughts. Bringing home probably had a very different connotation to them compared to me, and likely Arran too, judging by his expression. My brother, Connor. He was a mechanic. Oh, funny you should say that. Tabby is studying mechanics. Gale raised her voice a little, loud enough for Tabby to hear, a good few paces ahead of us. Unsurprisingly, she didn't respond, leading Gale to give the back of her head a frustrated look. What about you, Arran? My sister, Carrie. She was a navigator. He mumbled, barely audible. His confusion was replaced with an extremely uncomfortable look. Oh, of course, Carrie Marsh. You look a lot like her, you know. Gale gave him a cheery smile, but I could see that he was uncomfortable. Now it made sense why I recognized him when I first saw him. Images of the Arran crew members had been a fixture of news reports for months. So many personal stories of people whose lives had been cut tragically short, accompanied by grainy photos showing them with friends, family, lovers. Grim memorials played as an ongoing drama for a public that rapidly lost interest as the months without news dragged on and on. I remember the photos of the pretty young Laban navigator. Their resemblance was uncanny. Oh, you don't say. Yes, she's very pretty. I can't wait to meet her. I bet that she has a tale to tell. I felt my stomach clench, and this time I avoided looking at Arran. There was no mockery in her tone. She was serious. She thought that they were still alive. When I felt a vibration in my pocket, I was grateful for a chance to momentarily tune out the conversation. I pulled my phone out, seeing I had a new message. Hi, Pat. You arrive okay? It was Mum. My history had several messages from her, all stuff I'd missed owing to somewhat unreliable signal out here. All some variation of, have you arrived yet, or are you on the plane? I typed back, I'm okay in Svalbard, talk to you later about to board the ship, before slipping my phone back in my pocket. I need to remember to send her a message before we departed. While Sylvia had a satellite internet and phones we could use to contact the mainland, we've been warned about its unreliability. I wouldn't want to lose contact and have her worry. As I tuned back into the conversation, I realized that we'd arrived at the harbor. Before us was the MV Sylvia. I knew it was charted for just the 8 of us, but for some reason I expected it to be bigger. It didn't look much from here. A top deck and a main deck and presumably a lower deck. It looked more like a tourist ship than a search and rescue vessel. Still, I'd come this far, in for a penny. Waiting for us at the boarding ramp were 3 figures, a shark girl who was chatting idly with the other 2. She seemed quite cheerful. Her voice carried over to us as we approached, light and enthusiastic. When she spotted us, she immediately grinned and waved, beckoning us. Then there was the tigress who, upon our approach, gave us a piercing stare. Not hostile as such, more analyzing. When she locked eyes with me, she gave me a searching look before cracking a small smile. And the final figure was a huge guy, a Servian who, while not as tall as Sharif, was much more muscular. His deep, booming voice echoed across the quiet dock as he laughed heartily at something that the shark girl had said. Sharif strode ahead of our group with the long strides and utter confidence in his form. He smoothly extended a hand to the shark girl, towering over her. Without missing a beat, she beamed and accepted his handshake, saying something I couldn't quite hear from my position. He turned, facing us all as our group arrived. The stag and tigress shuffled around so that we formed a semicircle around Sharif and the shark glass. May I have your attention, please? Allow me to introduce myself. I am Sharif Abdi. I am responsible for this expedition as its principal financier. But we are all here for the same reason, to find our loved ones, or their fate. There were a few uncertain glances amongst our group. Once you are all on board and settled in your cabins, we will review the itinerary and how our search will be conducted. This is June. She is the ship's stewardess and your point of contact for the voyage. She will tend to your needs and answer your questions regarding the ship and its rules. Hello everyone, pleased to meet you. She waved at us with a cheerful grin. I will meet you all in the lounge at 11:30 p.m. Please be punctual. Without waiting for a response, he gave June a curt nod and strode up the ramp onto the deck before disappearing inside. Well, if you would all kindly follow me. She beckoned to us in our motley group. After a few mutual glances, we gathered our bags and cases and moved towards the boarding ramp. I paused at the foot of the ramp, drawing on my cigarette again. Gazing up at the ramp gave me a sudden bout of anxiety. This was it. Point of no return. With a final draw before flicking away the butt, I sighed and started my way up onto the Sylvia. As folks filed in through the door to the ship's interior, June bobbed her head at each person as if making a mental head count. She turned to look back at me, then grinned and waved. I grinned stupidly and returned the wave. Her bright, cheery expression just seemed to help melt away the knot of anxiety in my chest. At least until I felt a huge hand on my shoulder. Prostitut u vas ne najdetsja og onka? I turned and saw a wall that hadn't been there before, a wall wearing a warm winter jacket. Slowly my eyes traveled upwards until I saw a stern-looking face gazing down at me. The bull spoke with what sounded like a Russian accent, and even by Bovit's standards, this guy was fucking gargantuan. My jaw flopped open a few times as I tried to get words out. Evening, Joseph. Finished your rounds? She bounded up behind us. I cringed as I realized that she was waving at this guy, not me. Yes, just wanted to know if I could have a light. He never took his eyes off of me. He didn't seem to be trying to intimidate me. He just seemed very intense. And a guy his size didn't need to try to be intimidating. Of course, no problem. I reached inside my pocket and produced my lighter. From somewhere on his vast bulk, he produced a rolled cigarette, placed it between his lips, and leaned down for me to light it. His nostrils flared as he inhaled, the tip of his cigarette glowing as it caught. Spasibo. He inhaled, then let out a massive cloud of smoke and condensation from the bitterly cold air. Mine broke. Won't get a chance to replace it for a while. I felt a hand tugging on my sleeve. Let's go. Sorry, I don't think I caught your name. Oh, I'm Garret. Pleased to meet you both. June Cavern, just in case you missed it. And this is... Joseph. I'm the bosun. Automatically, I extend a hand which June shook with enthusiasm. When I offered it to Joseph, he also accepted. I tried not to think about how his hand almost engulfed mine. Come on now, let's get you settled. You must be looking forward to taking a load off. I gave Joseph a polite smile and nod as June led me off towards the ship's superstructure. Don't mind him. Joseph is a sweetheart. Bit quiet, but nice. She led me through the doorway where the others had entered. Immediately, I was hit with the comforting warmth of the ship's heated interior. An involuntary shudder went through me, as if my body was expelling the chill from my bones. As she closed the door behind me, the soft whistling of the wind abruptly stopped. We were in a lounge of some sort. A well-stocked bar, complete with stools, stood to one end, with a comfy-looking sofa nestled against the outer wall. On the other side was a large table with chairs set up around them, like a cross between a conference room and a dining room. This is the Explorers Club. Pretty neat, huh? Given the nature of this voyage, I'd almost expected a Spartan, grey and drab utilitarian ship. I guess Sharif realized that if we were going to be searching the Arctic Ocean, might as well do it in style. I'll give you guys the full tour, but first, you should get settled. The stairs are just on your left, to the door there. She fished a set of keys from her pocket and handed it to me. Once you drop off your stuff, Sharif wants everyone to gather back here. Got it, thanks. She flashed me another toothy smile before walking up the steps to the upper floor. There was a buzz of chatter and excited conversations from the cabins as I descended the stairs. The corridor for the cabins was a bit less swanky than upstairs. I could see the others through the open cabins, admiring their accommodations for the foreseeable future. A little over halfway down the corridor, I found the door to my cabin, Garret Reid. I slid the key in and unlocked it. The first thing that struck me was the smell, a piney wood scent. The room seemed a bit bigger than it was, thanks to the light painted walls, but the mahogany paneling along the separating wall gave it a touch of class. I had a double bed all to myself too. Pretty sweet. In the corner by the door was a small sofa and a coffee table, on which a teapot and cups were already placed. I suddenly realized I was gasping for a cup of tea, more than a cigarette even. I wouldn't call it high-class living, but for a ship cabin, it was pretty nice. Better than a lot of hotel rooms I'd stayed in, certainly. With a relieved sigh, I slipped my backpack off and placed it on the bed. My back was matted and hot from my jacket and the weight of the pack. It had been fine out in the cold, but now we were in a cozy environment. I was sweating up a storm. I gave myself a sniff. It was hard to trust my nose from a few years of smoking, but I detected the unpleasant scent of sweat. I wonder if I have time for a shower. Hey Garret, meeting starting. Of course not. Coming. With a heavy sigh, and hoping I could perhaps sit apart from the others until I could wash, I made my way back into the corridor, locking the cabin behind me. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Trust me, there's more content coming, but it's a lot of content. But yeah, that's probably like almost 2 hours worth of content for this build. So, what do you guys think so far of the story? The reason that I say that I think that I'm getting the Thing vibes is, in case you haven't seen the movie, it's based in Antarctica, and these guys are going to the Arctic, which is in the north, opposite of Antarctica, which is in the south, like all the way on the polar south. But, it's taking place in ice and snow. There's disappearances. This menu just gives you that sort of, like vibes that there's something sinister going on, and like an unknowable presence that's threatening these people. So yeah. But again, comments, write down what your thoughts are, and write down who your favorite character is so far. I personally like Garret because I vibe with Garret. I don't know. Not that I connect, but it's easy to put myself in his shoes because he's very much like me, except without the scarring and painful eye thing. But yeah. I don't know, tell me, do you guys like the possum? Do you like Arran? The little rabbit dude? Do you like either of the two sisters? I think they're goats. Gail and Tabby? Or do you like Sharif, the horse? Comments, write it down. Or do you like the tigress, Rufus, the tigress and Rufus, who you haven't really been introduced yet, but you will be in the next video. But yeah, comments, write down what you think, who you like, etc., etc. And thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play Polar Night yourself and find out what's happening, then you can find a direct link to it from the Polar Night VN Twitter page, which will be down in the description. And if you would like to support them, they do have a Patreon, which will be linked down in the description. And I guess that's it for now. So, bye-bye.